Hey there, this is Niels Beautiful, and today we're building Frostmourne from leather. This is quite a big build, but like every project, we start with the pattern first, printing, cutting it out, taping it together. The sword is about 1.4 meters long and has a weight of about 1.8 kilogram in the end. For the foam core, I use high density EVA foam with a thickness of 10 millimeters. Tape on the pattern and cut it roughly out to make it easier handleable. Next we want to trace the outline exactly and cut it out, but only cut out the pommel and the tip in detail. These we will use as reference later on after gluing everything together, since we need 3 layers. We also want to get in a core staff on the center layer, so we trace some lines and cut out some space for the staff. Just for a little bit more security, I break the edges of the core staff and glue on some soft leather just to make sure it will never poke through the foam. Then we can start to glue in the core staff and after that the different layers on each other. On all 3 layers we only roughly cut out the whole sword, but in detail the pommel and the tip. So we use these now as reference to lay everything onto each other. This way we end with a very roughly cut out 3 cm thick sword. After this we want to position our pattern on the foam again, glue it ideally on and trace the edges just to make sure. To cut everything out in detail I use a scroll saw, and I really recommend you something similar, since with this thick foam layer you will have some difficulties to make it exact with a knife. To make the main hitting area a little bit softer, we glue on a strap of low density EVA foam along the tip. To get an estimate how much to cut off, I trace a parallel line to the edge, and there I use it as a reference to cut away some of the foam to create the edge of the sword. For the details you can sand it by hand, but it won't be fun, so I recommend you having a sanding machine. Also we want to glue on some 5mm high density EVA foam on the skull base and 10mm on the pommel. And we keep on shaping with knife, sanding machine, and most importantly a rotary tool. For EVA Foam project these are just such a big time saver. And this is how it's supposed to look in the end. The pommel, the handle and also the guard are rounded, and everything else has a blade edge. Note that all shaping on every project will be a little bit different, so if you also want to tackle this, note that you have to adjust some of the pieces probably. To cover the blade edges I'm using soft Napa Leather. It's a little bit stretchy and can be kinda used like fabric. Another machine I'm using here is just a regular fabric sewing machine. Sewing together 2 layers of the same piece, which is just mirrored, and then make a test fit and pull it right over the blade to check if everything fits, and if not, make some adjustments, and else we can press on. We also need to cover up the spikes of the blade, so this is the piece for the job, and we want to sew it onto the existing tip piece. And when everything is done, we can make a test fit. And it's important that the leather is stretchy so you can pull it into the correct position and make it look good. To hold it in place, we're using some soft drying glue, which is in my case just wooden glue, and it's really important that it's soft drying, else when you hit later on somebody it will be quite hard. I'm doing this in sections, starting with the tip, putting on some glue and pull over the cover up, press it into place and then go further on to the next section. Since the leather is stretchy, we can use that ability to remove wrinkles by pulling it to the center of the blade. Any excess leather simply can be cut away. To give this sword a little bit of counterweight, I'm using some weight band along the handle. It's about 5 meters with a total weight of 500 grams. Start from the pommel, and if you run out of weight band, simply put in some leather to close the gap. This is our next step. We want to cover up the handle, so I'm using some velour leather in brown to do exactly that. We also want to cover up the guard completely, so on both ends you want to put on some soft leather as well as on the pommel. For all the ornaments we also trace the pattern on the leather like with the foam and cut it out. Moisten the veg tan leather completely from both sides and give it a little bit of drying time before you press on. Trace all the ornaments through the pattern on the leather and use some stamping tools to get them in shape. We need the pattern again to trace the sewing holes, and this is quite really important that on both of these blade pieces you want to get them in exactly the same position, else you will have later on quite some problems. And then we simply punch the sewing holes. Make the overlapping with other pieces a little bit more smooth. We thin out the end of the piece. And then we bevel the edges to break them and make them a little bit more smooth and prepare them for burnishing. For dyeing I used my airbrush and starting with some royal blue as base coat and then go a little bit darker on the edges and overall on the whole piece with some black. For the shiny metal look I use some resist together with some pigment powder, which is usually used for resin, and start to dry brushing around the edges just for a little bit shininess here, and with more direct color in blue on the ornaments. For more rustiness, I add an antique gel, put it everywhere, and then use a paper towel to wipe away all the excess on the surface. Here is a comparison before and after the antique gel. To finish it all up, I use a coat of resist on all the surface. And when you also put it on the edge, use the moisture right away for burnishing. For the skull we also need skulls, so we sew it just like this and get this one. It's not finished yet, so we soak it into water to shape it. You wanna roll in the eyes as well as the nose and then shape the teeth a little bit more roundish. Also you want to press the area between the eyes a little bit inwards, but mainly you want to shape it around the guard itself. For the pommels we need a few of these skulls and keep the shaping so far very rough and then sew it on. When it's sewn on, we can re-moisten everything and then do pretty much this very same to the skull like we did for the other one. Depending on your shaping of the EVA foam of the pommel, the base size can vary a little bit. Now we're starting to assemble everything, using some contact cement to get on the blade wedge tan leather piece, but for the moment just glue on one side. As you remember, I noted that it's very important to get all the sewing holes in the exact positions. And this is because we want to position them very exact onto each other. And to do this, we drill holes through the sewing holes all the way through and then use just regular sewing needles on certain holes to get the other side in exact position. When both pieces are not good aligned, you will have quite some problems sewing this one. We mark the area underneath, put on some contact cement and glue it on, and use the sewing needles here as exact positioning. And then we can more or less easily sew everything together. We also need these goat demon skulls, but for this I have an extra video in the top right corner for you. To place the guard skulls into place, put some glue on the edge and loosely sew the closure here, put it into place and pull everything tight. Next we want to sew on the goat demon skull onto its base. You want to make sure that the base is fairly flat to fit the EVA foam, and if not, just bend it a little bit in place. To put everything in position, use the horns to weave them a little bit around the guard. And chances are that your horns won't fit right away this good, so you have to re-moisten them and bend them a little bit in place. Now with this set, we open it up and put on some contact cement to glue it on. Be sure to also press in the areas underneath the skulls and the eyes. And with the same technique as on the blade, we drill holes through the sewing holes all the way through, use some sewing needles to position the other skull, put on some contact cement to glue it on, and sew it on. Next up is the pommel, and like other pieces we glue it into place and sew it. To also cover up the end of the pommel, we need this little ring. We moisten it and stretch out the inner ring, just to fit a little bit better. And then sew on this too. The second half of the ring you want to sew on very loosely, else you will run into trouble sewing everything. And the end, you just want to retighten all the threads, but you have to make sure 100% that you did not split any of them. Our last step are the handle straps. They will just cover up part of it and look nice, but we have to adjust them each for every position individually. Do so, mark the area, cut it away, bevel the edge, re-dye it and burnish it. Put on a little bit of glue and sew them in place. And this is it already. Was quite a large project with very diverse steps to do and also quite a few machines, and without these it would be definitely quite a very annoying piece, but I like really how it turned out in the end. I want to use this in lab combat, so let's see how this turns out. I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out my other videos as well as my shop, and see you guys next time. Have a great day.